Eric is the Director of Biodiversity and Wildlife Solutions at Resolve, and he works on conservation efforts on behalf of tigers, rhinos, elephants, and other endangered species. Eric, the dais is all yours.
Thanks so much, David, and thanks to Peter for inviting me. This is, unlike some of you, this is my first ever conference, so it's really a pleasure to be here. What I'm going to try to do in my really short talk is to start with, let's call it a burglar alarm. I think that, or just an environmental alarm. I think in the previous talks, Luis and Gabrielle and even David have talked about things that we need to be aware of because of the crises, the multiple existential crises we face. And so, not to make it sound even worse, I'm going to make it a little bit worse in the beginning, but then I'm going to show how we're going to make it better. But in my short talk, I'm going to talk about the problems that we face, some of the severe problems that haven't been discussed yet on the environmental sector, and the challenges, why they are so severe, why current technologies are not working to solve those problems, to introduce some innovations that we've managed to develop over the last 5 years, I guess you could say, and more actively in the last 2 or 3. What are some of those innovations that this features? Also looking at some of the partnerships that we formed to innovate with some of the world's leading tech companies. What are the results from putting our technology in the field in Africa and other wild places to save wildlife? How we're doing on scaling, what the demand is, what the market looks like, and then close on some thoughts about how people can help and what the grander vision is and how this relates to all these existential crises. So let me start by first talking about something very basic. We just heard David say that people might not get into their car and do their Sunday drives much more, but let's assume they are, and let's assume that you've been vaccinated and that car trip that you've put off to go somewhere and visit a national park or just the relatives in the next state. And you leave your home and you feel safe leaving your home because your most valuable possessions are protected because you have a security system that would alert you through an email or sound an alarm if anyone tried to break in. But what about the world's protected areas? There are 250,000 terrestrial protected areas in the world. 80,000 of them are under threat by either illegal mining, gold mining, logging, poaching, etc. Why don't we have a security system to protect the Earth's most valuable lands and endangered species from illegal activities? So that's the fundamental question to start this. What we've really done is to create a burglar alarm for national parks, and I'm going to get into that detail. But here are some additional environmental crises that we have to face as a result of lack of protection for nature. The first is poaching. Poaching is decimating global biodiversity, driving endangered wildlife to extinction. Many of you know probably that some scientists, and I've written a lot about this, saying that we're in the midst of the 6th great extinction crisis in the history of our planet. Let's make that more concrete. Mountain gorillas and African forest elephants could go extinct in the next decade if current trends continue. And by the time that my talk is over today, 1 elephant will have been killed by poachers in Africa. It's 35,000 a year. And so we could be facing really an Armageddon of loss of these great creatures. If we move from wildlife to another important commodity or another important resource, tropical timber. In some countries, up to 90% of the logging in tropical forest countries is illegal. And that deprives governments and local communities of revenue in the millions and millions of dollars, whether it's teak, rosewood, ebony, the high-grade commercial timber. A lot of this is smuggled at total loss of any revenue to the government. Could we stop that? These environmental crimes are driven by a lucrative illicit trade of wildlife and timber, just pick 2 of them, that are estimated at $25 billion a year. More importantly, they're also run by some of the same syndicates that are involved in terrorism, drug and weapon smuggling, human trafficking. So these are not great actors in the environment. They simply look at wildlife poaching because that's the one that chances are they're least likely going to pay a penalty for. It's harder to get caught. So if these are all these problems, then why in the world do we not have security systems for national parks to protect these vital resources? The first is may be obvious to anybody who's been to Africa or even to Yellowstone, is that the protection of wildlife and habitat in these huge remote parks still relies on limited protection forces, which is really ineffective against these mounting threats. Let me give you an example. I live here in the state of Maryland, and the Serengeti National Park, where we have our technology deployed, which I'll introduce in a second, is the size of the state of Maryland, but they only have 155 guards to protect the park. So imagine trying to protect an area the size of Maryland with 155 rangers. That's impossible. The second is that most of the technology that's out there for anti-poaching or illegal logging is all post-mortem. It's all after the rhinos have been poached and their horns have been cut off, or the elephants have had their ivory removed, or the tropical timbers are cut down and they're already stacked at a port waiting to be exported to Vietnam or China. A major problem too is that the existing technology that aids protection is really inefficient. It doesn't use AI, it lacks the real-time feedback. They're particularly wasteful on batteries. There's no connectivity in many remote areas, and it's really costly. That's a huge stack of problems to try to solve. But I'm going to introduce now our solution that takes advantage of the technological advances in AI or computer vision and radio communications technology and satellite for conservation. So what I'm about to show you is just now hitting the market. I was told that there's no slides, but there are props. So I'm going to take advantage of the prop rule. Here's our camera. So it's slightly bigger than your index finger. And what it is it's not a camera. It's a camera in a computer. And I'd like to call it an AI-enabled camera-based alert system that can transmit images in near real time to a headquarters, to anybody in our server on their cell phone of any kind of transgression that's going on. And we've developed this with our theme is how to stop the crimes before they occur. So put these on the perimeter of national parks to detect poachers before they get in and kill the elephants and rhinos, put them on the edges of logging roads, put them on the confluences of rivers going into indigenous reserves to try and protect them and get situational awareness before the bad actors actually enter and do their deeds, or that, say, poachers lay snares to capture wildlife. And I'll give an example of that in a second. So these are AI enabled and they provide real-time alerts. They provide essentially a one-stop solution to, we heard before, monitor or measure. You have to do that. So you can measure, you can prevent, and ultimately you can deter environmental crimes. And to make these understaffed reserves to be a force multiplier, a term used in the military, to enable that ranger team of the Serengeti of 155 rangers to be as effective as 1,550 rangers. So what are the innovations? I was at a conference on conservation technology about 8 years ago at Google, and an engineer who didn't know anything about biology would not know a fulmar, which was mentioned in Gabriel's talk, which I do know as a biologist, as a seabird. But this engineer wasn't in our field, but he said, listening to our talks, sometimes you get somebody who's outside your field and they can essentially encapsulate it in an essence, in a single phrase. And he said, it sounds to me like your whole problem comes down to solving two issues, battery life and connectivity. And he couldn't have been more right. And so I'm going to introduce now the innovations that we've made, and I'd add a few more, which I'll cover, but he was essentially on the right track. So the first thing is miniaturization. And we know that things have been made much smaller, which is fantastic. Our cameras, like I said, are extremely small compared to the typical trail camera. If you put one in your backyard to see the raccoon coming by or the deer, they're much bigger and bulkier. Consequently, they often get stolen. And so for cash-strapped national parks or researchers monitoring tigers like I used to do, you have a camera stolen and it's hard to replace, to find the budget to do that. Our cameras almost never get stolen. We do have problems with hyenas. If we put the battery if people forget to, and they put the battery cable on the ground, the hyena will chew anything that a human touches. So you put the battery higher up in the tree and that engineers out the problem. Hyenas don't climb trees. Okay, so we have a camera that's tiny. The next generation, which is coming out in July, is the world's smallest camera. I always admired James Bond and his Minox cameras, his spy cameras, and I thought, oh, this is cool, but James Bond didn't have AI back in the time. So this is our next camera. There's only 3 inches. It's like a little seed pod. But what's amazing about this camera, it's a camera and a computer. So in here is Intel's Movidius Myriad 2 Vision Processing Unit chip, which is a mouthful for a tiny chip that's 14 microprocessors in one that allows us to run the latest AI on the edge, so on the chip itself, and do inference in the camera. And I'll explain in a second why that's important. So, but the first thing is that in some wildlife projects or monitoring projects, up to 40% of the cameras that are out in the field can get stolen in the first year. And so you can't afford that loss. So by putting these high up 15, 20 feet away from the trail, also because the AI that we run is agnostic to the angle of the trail, you can hide this 15, 20 feet up in a tree and disguise it. We typically, our recommendation in East Africa is put a little bit of liquid contact cement around the camera and then put dried elephant dung around it. And that makes a perfect camouflage. And so nobody can find the camera. So elephants are contributing to their own protection through their dung, I guess you could say that. Okay, so we've covered miniaturization. On the edge AI. So we know from autonomous driving vehicles is that how moving AI to the edge is essential for making quick decisions for the computer. The same is true here. Most wildlife cameras that have some kind of transmission, whether it's GSM, they send everything. So typically, getting back to that Google engineer's point, that connectivity that allows you to send everything diminishes your battery life. The batteries will last maybe 2 to 3 months if you send all the transmissions. And in Africa, you could get a herd of wildebeest or zebra in front of you and just moving back and forth, and you're sending lots and lots of images of wildebeest and zebras, but not of the things you want to see, like a lion or an elephant or a rhino or a poacher. So by having an AI model that runs on the edge, you can filter all that out and only transmit the images that you want. That's fundamental of AI to be able to help save batteries by reducing 95% of the information that's sent that's of little use and only sending the 5% that is of use, and reducing the transmission costs both to the battery and the actual cost you're expending. So the next is long battery life. As I mentioned, by being miserly, by using a very low power chip, and essentially our camera is in off position and our communications device, most of its life, it's only woken up for milliseconds to go to work and milliseconds to load the AI module. And then when it's done, it shuts down. So we estimated that a single camera in the field, instead of 2 months, can last about 5 years with its battery. And so this is it. This is just a rechargeable lithium battery. And by adding also a little solar panel and trickle charger, they basically become autonomous. You never have to change the batteries, which is a real game changer in and of itself. So we solved the battery life problem. Now onto connectivity. If all we have is AI in the camera and we're not able to transmit the image, then it's just a really smart camera. And that's pretty cool. But for our law enforcement and protection and stopping illegal loggers, illegal poachers, intruders before they do any damage, you have to get the near real-time alert out. So we have a manufactured multi-purpose communications unit that has on it here, I'm showing you the guts of it, a GSM modem that can send over a cell network, which works great where there's cell, but as anybody's experienced trying to make a call from a national park, there is typically very little cell connectivity. In place of that, we use LoRa, a long-range, low-power, long-range radio link that can transmit images over long distances, but a little bit slower. Or a new application we have that is really going to be, we think, this has been our holy grail. I've got it covered now because I haven't released the name of it yet. But this is a satellite modem made by the world's leading satellite company that they've made available to us for a very low price of $300. And this has been our holy grail for 8 years, to be able to have a satellite modem cheap enough that it could pair with its own camera. And you could put this anywhere in the world. So the problems we have in transmission, like protecting rainforests in the Amazon that Luis talked about, of intruders there or loggers, or other places like in remote islands in Hawaii, protecting fulmars in the Aleutian Islands from rodents getting on those islands. There's no cell connectivity there. So anyway, what I wanted to say here is that this is now available and enables us to communicate anywhere in the world. So it's really being able to leverage with major tech companies. Intel has given us access to their vision processing unit chip. We're the only nonprofit they work with in conservation, and it's our mission to be able to send this to share this with all the other conservation groups. Typically, they said, you know, we don't want to work with 30 groups, but Resolve, our small NGO, is far ahead, and so we'll work with you on this. And it's our mission to get this out to everybody else. We also work with a company called Cividia. That's a state-of-the-art software company that creates models from synthetic data. And that's really revolutionary in the sense that you can think of it like Disney or Pixar. So they have artists that make 3D renditions of bears, wolves, tigers, and is able to then animate those 3D renditions, expose them to different angles, light, etc. So from synthetic data to create a neural network, and then just use validation data from the field to make sure those are accurate. So we run those, and then we were able to see that these models are super accurate. So every camera comes with Cividia's software, patented software on it, to be able to detect whatever object it is that people want to in nature. And then Inmarsat and Galaxy One, those are our partners, some of the leaders in satellite technology, and that is actually their satellite modem that makes available at a conservation discount this technology that solves the problems that Google engineer said is, how do you solve the battery life issue and connectivity, is now we have a device that can transmit from the densest rainforest to remote islands and still get a signal out of what we want. So results so far, we began this with proof of concept in 2017 in a park in East Africa. I won't name out of concern for them and their wishes, but we showed that we were able to detect poachers easily. We detected 30 poachers who were arrested representing 20 different poaching gangs before they were actually killing wildlife. And the amount of slaughter is staggering. In the Serengeti, people know of that because of the millions of wildebeest and zebras that are part of that annual migration. What they don't know is that each year, 144,000 wildebeest are killed by poachers from snares. That's just the wildebeest. It's not the zebras, the giraffes, the dik-diks, the impalas. It's a slaughter. And so being able to detect these poachers before they go in is a huge advantage. So there's obviously great demand for this. We're now in 7 parks. Now that we've started manufacture, we're in 7 parks in Africa right now. Our plan is to get to 30 parks by the end of 2021, and by 2022 to be in 100 of the most important wildlife parks of Africa and give them the burglar alarms that they need.
Eric?
So, yeah.
This is really powerful stuff, and it's worthy. This is worthy work that you're doing, and I'm really glad you are. One question before you had mentioned a video animation company, Cividia. Is that correct? And
software, AI, AI algorithms. Yes.
Great. All right. Well, I'm sure there are lots of questions from the audience as well. Maybe what we can do is collect them in the Q&As and then feed them on to you afterwards. And that way you can have people to respond to as well.
Sure. If I could just end with just like 2 sentences. If that's
yes, okay. Absolutely.
Yeah, is that, so, if a technology like ours existed, there'd be millions of them out there because the need is so great. We've estimated that demand is, in orders of hundreds of thousands of units to cover parks. And we hope to be able to scale that. To do that, we're using Intel's designated factory in China that's building them now. And we're going to large scale production by the end of the year. So this has gone from, just a dream 8 years ago of, wouldn't it be great if, those sentences that start that way or questions, to this is actual reality and proving results right now in Africa and soon to the rest of the world. So it's one great one of the many environmental problems we have that we now, I think, have a tech solution that can contribute greatly to solving it.